I always believed the most terrifying sound in the world was the shrill, insistent ring of a telephone in the dead of night. That specific, piercing tone that shreds the fabric of sleep and yanks you into a waking nightmare, your heart instantly a frantic bird against your ribs. But I was wrong. So utterly wrong. The most terrifying sound is not a sound at all. It is a silence. It is the profound, suffocating quiet of a house that has lost its heartbeat. It is the echo of a laughter that has faded, of a voice that no longer calls your name, of the space where a family once lived and breathed and argued and loved. This is the silence I inhabit now. It's not an empty silence, it's a heavy, dense thing, thick with ghosts and regrets. It presses down on me the moment I open my eyes in the morning, a physical weight on my chest that makes it hard to breathe. It follows me from the sterile kitchen to the lonely living room, a constant, accusing companion. In this silence, my mind becomes a torturous cinema, replaying the same tragic film on a loop. The scenes are always the same. Me, rushing out the door, a piece of toast clenched between my teeth, my bag overflowing with student portfolios, my mind already miles away in my classroom. I'll be there, I promise. I'd shout over my shoulder, a hollow vow tossed into the air like a cheap confetti. Ben, my husband, would stand in the doorway, his kind, patient face etched with a resignation that I was too busy to notice. He was a potter, a man who understood the slow, deliberate art of creation, of taking something raw and formless and shaping it with care into something beautiful and solid. His hands were always faintly dusted with clay, a testament to his work, while my hands were always stained with ink, a testament to mine. He built our home, not just the wooden beams and plaster walls, but the very soul of it. He was the one who planted the lilac bush by the porch because he knew I loved the smell, who fixed the wobbly leg on Lily's chair, who remembered to buy the specific kind of strawberry jam she liked. He built a life for us, a sturdy, beautiful table around which we were meant to gather, and I was always too preoccupied to sit down. And Lily. My Lily. My bright, beautiful girl who saw the world not in words and sentences, but in a kaleidoscope of colors and emotions. While I lived in the black and white certainty of text, she lived in a brilliant, swirling universe of pigment and light. Her room wasn't a bedroom, it was a studio, a sanctuary of creation. The walls were a constantly evolving gallery of her inner world, fantastical landscapes with rivers of silver, self-portraits that captured moods I often failed to see, abstract explosions of feeling that were more honest than any diary entry. I would stand in her doorway and feel a swell of pride, but it was always followed by a nagging, professional anxiety. This is wonderful, sweetheart, I'd say, my eyes already scanning the room for a book she should be reading instead. But you know, the stories in these books can take you to even more amazing places. I was so blind. I failed to understand that her paintings were her stories. They were her native language, a fluent, visceral narrative of her heart. I was so busy trying to teach her to speak my second language that I never bothered to become literate in hers. I was a teacher, a decoder of the world's greatest stories, and I was missing the most important one unfolding right in front of me. The collapse of my family wasn't a sudden, catastrophic event like an earthquake. It was a slow, insidious erosion, like rust on iron or water on stone. It was the 1,000 tiny fractures that finally caused the structure to buckle. It was in the parent-teacher conference I scheduled on the evening of her first ballet recital. I told myself it was for a struggling reader, a boy named Samuel whose mother worked 2 jobs and could only meet in the evening. I told myself it was a sacrifice for a greater good. I missed Lily pirouetting across the stage in a sequined costume, her face alight with joy, and I saw only the faint disappointment in Ben's eyes when I got home, a disappointment so familiar it had become part of our furniture. It was in the family vacation to the coast we had to cut short because I was needed for a summer literacy workshop. It's for the kids who are falling behind, I'd explained, my voice full of manufactured regret. You understand, don't you? Ben had just looked out the car window at the passing ocean, his silence a louder condemnation than any shout. Lily had drawn a picture of the sea for weeks afterward, but the water was always a turbulent, angry gray. The symbol of our family, the very heart of the home Ben had built, was our dining table. He had made it himself from a massive slab of reclaimed oak. It was solid, rugged, beautiful in its imperfections. Its surface was a living map of our life together, the faint white ring from a wineglass I'd set down without a coaster, the tiny, precise dents from where Lily had practiced her woodworking, the waxy, rainbow smudges of countless crayons ground into the grain, the ghost of a watercolor spill that had left a pale blue stain like a forgotten continent. That table was our anchor. But over the years, we drifted away from it. I started eating meals standing at the kitchen island, correcting spelling tests. Lily would take her plate to her room, lost in a new artistic project. Ben would sit at that vast, empty expanse of wood alone, the silence gathering around him like a storm cloud. The table became a monument to our isolation, a physical manifestation of the distance between us. I would sometimes run my hand over its cool, scarred surface late at night and feel a deep, aching sadness, a pang of loss for something I couldn't even name. But I would quickly bury it, smother it with thoughts of lesson plans and reading level assessments. The final act of our family drama wasn't a single, dramatic scene. It was a slow-motion avalanche that had been building for years, and it culminated on Lily's 16th birthday. She had been secretive and excited for months, working on a special series of paintings in her room. She called it her portfolio project. The light was back in her eyes, the creative fire that made her so brilliantly her. She asked me, not just casually, but with a solemn, intense earnestness, to be home for her birthday dinner. "It's really, really important, Mom," she'd said, her hand on my arm, her gaze holding mine. "I have something to show you and Dad. It's everything." I remember the feel of her hand, the hope in her voice. I made a vow. I looked her in the eye and I promised. "I will be there, Lily. Nothing in the world will keep me away. I swear on my life." I even did a silly little cross-my-heart gesture, the one I used to do when she was small. She beamed, a real, unguarded, joyful smile that I hadn't seen in years. I felt, for a moment, like a good mother. But of course, the world intervened. Or rather, my other world, the one where I felt competent and needed and in control. That afternoon, I was working with Michael, a 7-year-old boy with severe dyslexia. For him, reading was a daily battle against a confusing, shifting army of letters. B's and D's swapped places, words danced and blurred on the page, and the simple act of decoding a sentence was an exhausting feat of mental gymnastics. We had been trying a new multi-sensory approach, tracing letters in trays of sand, building words with plastic tiles, singing phonics songs. And that day, something miraculous happened. It was as if a key had finally turned in a long-locked door. The letters settled. They held their shape. He looked at the word stop and instead of a jumble, he saw a red octagonal sign. He saw a command. He saw meaning. His voice, usually a hesitant mumble, grew stronger. He read a whole page from an Arnold Lobel book, his small body trembling not with frustration, but with a dawning, glorious triumph. When he finished the last word, he looked up at me, his eyes wide, shimmering with tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "I did it, Ms. Alara," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "I really, truly did it." It was one of those perfect, crystalline moments that teachers live for. The moment when struggle transforms into success, when confusion gives way to clarity. It was a validation of my entire life's work. I was elated. I lost all sense of time, of place, of any other commitment. We celebrated. We did a silly victory dance around the classroom. I gave him 3 stickers instead of 1. I called his mother, my voice bubbling with excitement, sharing the wonderful news. We must have talked for 20 minutes. By the time I hung up, the classroom windows were dark mirrors reflecting the fluorescent lights, and a quick, panicked glance at the clock confirmed my nightmare. Lily's birthday dinner had started 45 minutes ago. I drove home through a sudden, freezing downpour, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart hammering a frantic, guilty rhythm against my ribs. I rehearsed my speech the whole way. "You have to understand, Lily. It was a breakthrough. A child's entire future might have just changed in that moment. You'll see when you're older. This is what I do. This is who I am." The words sounded hollow and selfish even to my own ears. I skidded into the driveway, fumbled with my keys, and burst through the front door, my apology already spilling out in a breathless, desperate torrent. "I'm so sorry. The traffic was awful, and then Michael, you remember Michael, he finally..." The words died in my throat. The scene in the dining room was frozen, a still life of profound disappointment. The table was set with our best linen and china. 2 tall, elegant candles had burned down, their wax cascading over the silver holders like frozen tears. The food, a beautiful rosemary chicken Ben had learned to make just for Lily, roasted potatoes, steamed green beans, sat on the plates, cold and untouched. Ben and Lily were seated opposite each other. They weren't speaking. They weren't even looking at each other. The air in the room was thick and cold, heavy with a betrayal so palpable I could taste it. Lily turned her head slowly to look at me. There were no tears. Her face was a mask of serene, utter devastation. It was the calm after the storm, and it was infinitely more terrible than any anger. His name is Michael, she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. It was a statement of fact, a final verdict. The boy who is more important than your own daughter. His name is Michael. She pushed her chair back from the table. The sound of the legs scraping against the wooden floor was a scream in the silent house. It's fine. My presentation can wait. It's not like it's important or anything. She walked out of the room, her footsteps measured and steady on the stairs. A moment later, I heard the soft, definitive click of her bedroom door closing. It was the sound of a vault ceiling shut. Ben finally moved. He lifted his head and looked at me. And what I saw in his eyes shattered the last illusion I had been clinging to. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, bone-weary grief. It was the look of a man who had finally given up. Elara, he said, and his voice was raspy, worn thin. We can't keep living like this. We can't keep coming in second. We can't keep being the later that never comes. Lily and we need to be someone's now. He stood up, his movements slow and heavy, as if he carried the weight of all our lost years on his shoulders. He didn't look at me again. He just walked out of the dining room and up the stairs, leaving me alone in the chilling silence, surrounded by the ruins of a birthday, a family, a life. They left 2 weeks later. Ben said it was temporary, a trial separation, a chance for everyone to get some space and perspective. He found a small apartment on the other side of town. Lily, when she came to collect her things, moved through the house like a ghost. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She packed her clothes, her art supplies, her favorite books, but she left behind the series of paintings she had worked on for months. They were leaning against the living room wall, 5 canvases carefully shrouded in a clean white sheet. A single sheet of notebook paper was taped to the front. In her graceful, looping handwriting, it read, "For Mom. Since you never have time to come into my world, I brought a piece of mine to yours." I couldn't bring myself to look at them. The shrouded bundle felt like a coffin containing the corpse of our relationship. I would walk past it every day, a fresh wave of guilt and shame washing over me. It was my own personal monument to failure. The house, now truly empty, became a cavern of echoes. Every creak of the floorboard, every hum of the refrigerator, was a reminder of the life that was no longer there. I was adrift in a sea of my own making. I tried to lose myself in work, but the passion was gone. The magic had evaporated. The letters on the page were just arbitrary marks again. The stories felt like lies. How could I stand in front of a class and talk about the importance of connection, of understanding a character's motivations, of empathy, when I had so spectacularly failed to practice any of those things in my own home? I was a hypocrite, a shell going through the motions, a lock that had lost its key. The divorce proceedings were cold, a bureaucratic unraveling of a life that had once been warm and messy and alive. The house was sold. The oak table, the heart of our home, was put into a storage unit, a relic of a lost civilization. I moved into a small, beige apartment that smelled of bleach and loneliness. It held no memories, and for that, I was at first grateful. But the silence followed me. It was now internal, a hollowed-out space in my chest where my family used to be. I thought about quitting teaching. What was the point? The very foundation of my identity had crumbled. The noble cause for which I had sacrificed everything now felt like a pathetic excuse for my own selfishness. But I had a contract, and a stubborn, prideful part of me refused to be seen as a quitter. So I returned. Day after day, I stood in front of my students, a smile plastered on my face that felt like a grotesque mask. My classroom, once a vibrant hub of energy and discovery, felt like a tomb. The children, sensitive to the moods of adults, became subdued around me. They tiptoed, they spoke in hushed tones. The magic was gone, and they knew it. And then, Maya arrived. She was a slip of a girl, 6 years old, with hair as black as a raven's wing and enormous, dark eyes that held a universe of pain. She had been removed from her home by child services and placed in a new foster family. She didn't speak. Not a single word. The trauma she had endured had built a fortress around her, and she had retreated deep inside, behind walls so high and thick I despaired of ever reaching her. During reading circle, she would curl into a tight ball in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her chin tucked down, her gaze fixed on some internal horror that none of us could see. I approached her with all my professional tools. I brought out the phonics flashcards, the interactive books with sound buttons, the puppet that was supposed to make learning fun. I tried to read her beautiful, lyrical picture books about friendship and courage. She was utterly unresponsive. She wouldn't look at the pages. She wouldn't touch the puppets. She was a book written in a language I couldn't decipher, a locked door for which I had no key. My initial frustration was that of a craftsman whose tools have failed. But soon, that frustration melted into a chilling, personal recognition. I saw myself in her. I saw my own retreat from the world, my own refusal to engage with a life that had become too painful. Her silence was a mirror, and in it, I saw the reflection of my own soul, equally silent, equally broken. We were two lost creatures, huddled in our separate corners, nursing our separate wounds. One afternoon, in a moment of sheer, desperate instinct, I abandoned the curriculum entirely. I sat on the floor a few feet away from her, not trying to invade her space, but simply sharing it. I didn't open a book. I opened a large plastic tub of crayons, the big box with the sharpener on the back, and I placed a giant sheet of white butcher paper on the floor between us. I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at her. I simply picked up a crayon, a forest green one, and began to draw. I drew a clumsy, lopsided tree. I added a swing hanging from one of its branches. I colored the sky a pale, watery blue. I wasn't an artist. My tree looked more like a lollipop with leaves, my swing a precarious rectangle. But I was speaking her language, or at least, attempting to. I was making an offering without any demand for a return. I did this every day for what felt like an eternity. I would sit in my spot, and I would draw something simple. A house with a smoking chimney. A flower with too many petals. A smiling sun. I never asked her to join me. I never pressured her to pick up a crayon. I was simply creating a consistent, quiet, non-threatening space. It was an apology. It was a peace treaty. It was me, finally, trying to learn a language I should have mastered years ago. Then, one gray Tuesday, as I was carefully coloring the windows of a house a bright, cheerful yellow, I saw a movement from the corner of my eye. A small, pale hand, tentative as a baby bird, reached out. Maya's fingers hovered over the crayons before selecting a deep, cobalt blue. Slowly, so slowly, she stretched her arm and began to draw at the bottom of my picture. She drew wavy, horizontal lines. Water. She was drawing a lake or a sea beneath my lollipop tree. Then, she added a small, brown boat, a simple oval with a triangle for a sail. And then, beside the boat, she pressed the blue crayon to the paper and made a single, shaky, but deliberate mark. It was a letter. A capital M. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a sentence. But in that one, wobbly letter, I saw an entire epic. It was her name. It was her identity, emerging from the fog of her trauma. It was the first, fragile thread she was throwing out, a lifeline back to the world. And as I looked at that M, something deep within me, something that had been frozen solid for so long, cracked open. A tiny sliver of light pierced the perpetual winter in my soul. I wasn't teaching her. She was teaching me. She was teaching me about patience that exists without a timetable. She was teaching me about communication that transcends words. She was teaching me that sometimes, the most powerful lessons are learned in silence. That night, I went back to my lonely apartment, but the silence felt different. It felt less like a punishment and more like a quiet library, a place for contemplation. My eyes were drawn, as they always were, to the shrouded paintings from Lily. The fear and guilt were still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now mingled with a new, strange curiosity, a courage that Maya's M had ignited in me. I walked over to them, my heart pounding. With trembling hands, I pulled the white sheet away. There were 5 canvases. They were not the work of a child, they were the work of an artist. The skill, the emotion, the raw talent took my breath away. The first was a family portrait, but it was a portrait of absence. Ben was in the foreground, his hands covered in clay, a warm, patient, but sad smile on his face. I was there too, but I was a blur, a smudge of color and motion, rushing out of the frame, a stack of papers clutched to my chest, my face averted, featureless. Lily had painted herself as a small figure in the middle, looking up at my retreating back, one hand slightly raised, as if in a wave or an attempt to stop me. The title, written in small, precise letters in the bottom corner, was almost. The word was a dagger. We were almost a family. I was almost there. She almost had a mother. The second painting was of our dining table. It was empty, the chairs pushed in neatly. But she had painted the ghosts of us around it, faint, translucent, shimmering images of the three of us laughing, passing dishes, talking animatedly. A memory, a haunting. A glimpse of what used to be. The third was a self-portrait, her face split dramatically between light and shadow. The side in light was serene, beautiful, hopeful. The side in shadow was etched with a pain that made my breath catch. A single, exquisitely rendered tear traced a path down her cheek from her shadowed eye. The fourth painting was a violent, chaotic explosion of red and black and angry slashes of purple. It was raw, unfiltered anguish. It was the sound of a slammed door, a scream given form. It was her pain, and I had been its cause. It was the fifth and final painting that undid me completely. It was a painting of me, in my classroom. But I wasn't the focus. I was in the background, a facilitator, a guide. The foreground was filled with children, their faces bright and eager, books open in their hands. But from the pages of these books, instead of just words, light and color were streaming out, golden beams, azure waves, emerald vines. These streams of light from each child were weaving together in the air above them, forming a magnificent, complex, breathtaking tapestry of interconnected stories and lives. And in the very bottom corner of the canvas, almost hidden, was a small girl with a paintbrush in her hand, adding her own unique thread of brilliant, sapphire blue to that glorious, collective tapestry. The title of this one was What She Gave Away. I collapsed to my knees, the sobs finally breaking free, great, wrenching waves of grief and a dawning, staggering understanding. She saw it. Even in the depths of her own anger and hurt, my daughter had seen the truth that I had been blind to. She saw that I gave my heart away to my students. She saw my absences, my distractions. But she also saw the beauty of it. She saw that in giving those pieces of myself away, I was helping to create something larger, something beautiful, a tapestry of light and learning and hope. She wasn't just blaming me, she was acknowledging me. She was showing me my life from her perspective, a perspective that was both critical and breathtakingly generous. She was offering me a story, a narrative of my own life that I had been completely unable to read. And in that offering, I felt the first, fragile, terrifying seedling of something I thought I'd lost forever, forgiveness. Not from her, not yet, but for myself. From that day on, I began to see my students not as projects, not as reading levels to be elevated, but as tiny, resilient philosophers, each carrying their own invisible backpacks filled with burdens and wonders. They became my teachers. There was Leo, who stuttered so badly that forming a single sentence was a Herculean effort. He would clench his little fists, his face turning red with the strain, but he never gave up. He would painstakingly sound out words, his determination a quiet, powerful force in the room. He taught me about a courage that has nothing to do with being unafraid, but everything to do with moving forward despite the fear. There was Chloe, a tiny girl with curls the color of wheat, who was possessed of a relentless, effervescent kindness. She was always the first to share her snack, to offer a hug when someone skinned a knee, to draw a picture for a friend who was sad. In my world, which had become so gray and sharp-edged, her simple, unconditional goodness was a balm. She taught me that kindness is an active verb, a relentless, stubborn force that can soften the hardest of hearts. And there was Maya. My silent teacher. Slowly, tentatively, her world began to unfurl on paper. She moved from single letters to words. She would write sad next to a drawing of a rain cloud. She wrote scared beside a picture of a dark closet. Then, one day, she drew a small, simple house with a bright yellow door and wrote, safe, with a delicate, questioning question mark. My heart ached. I took a sticky note and wrote back in my clearest print, yes, Maya. You are safe here. Always. I placed it next to her drawing. She looked at it for a long, long time, then carefully peeled it off the table, folded it into a tiny, precious square, and tucked it deep into the pocket of her jeans. She was teaching me that trust is not built in grand gestures, but in these small, quiet moments. It is built one sticky note, one crayon drawing, one moment of quiet presence at a time. She was teaching me that healing is not a loud, dramatic arrival, but a slow, gentle unfolding, like a flower turning its face toward the sun. I began to understand, truly understand, that my life's journey wasn't about choosing between my family and my profession. That was a false dichotomy, a story I had told myself to justify my own imbalance. The real work was about integration. It was about weaving the threads together. It was about bringing the same deep, patient, attentive listening I was finally learning in my classroom back into my own heart. I had to learn to sit with my own failure, to acknowledge it, to feel the full weight of the pain I had caused, without letting it destroy me. I had to learn to read my own story not as a tragedy of loss, but as a difficult, painful, but ultimately transformative chapter in a much longer, more complex narrative. I had to learn to forgive myself. I started writing letters to Lily. Not emails or texts, real, pen-to-paper letters. I bought beautiful stationery and my favorite black ink pen. I didn't make excuses. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I simply told her stories. I told her about Maya's first, wobbly M. I told her about Leo's brave stutter and the day he read a whole sentence without stopping. I told her about Chloe's inexplicable kindness. I told her how her painting, the new alphabet, had shattered me and put me back together again. I told her that I was finally, learning to see the world in color, to understand the language of the heart that she had been fluent in all along. I sent the letters to Ben's apartment address, not knowing if she would receive them, if she would read them, if she would tear them up. It didn't matter. The act of writing them was my own form of sitting on the floor with a box of crayons. It was an offering. A testament. A way of saying, I am here. I am learning. I see you now. A whole year turned over. The sharp edges of my grief began to soften, worn smooth by the daily practice of small kindnesses, to my students, and to myself. Maya was speaking now, in soft, short sentences. She had a particular love for books about brave girls who found their way home. We would read them together, her small voice, once silenced, now gaining strength and confidence with every turned page. One afternoon, she finished a book about a little mouse who gets lost in a forest but finds her way back by following the stars. Maya closed the book, held it to her chest, and looked at me. It's a good story, she announced, her voice clear as a bell. Why is it good, Maya? I asked. Because, she said, her dark eyes serious, she was lost, but she was brave. And she found her way home. The simple, profound truth of her words washed over me, leaving me cleansed and quiet. Yes, Maya, I whispered, my throat tight with a gratitude so immense it felt like pain. She found her way home. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment. The blinking red light on my ancient answering machine caught my eye. I rarely checked it. I pressed the button. It was Ben's voice, but it was different. Softer. Less guarded. Elara, he said. There was a long, static-filled pause, and I could hear him breathing, gathering his thoughts. Lily, she got your letters. All of them. She's been reading them. Another pause. My heart was in my throat. She'd like to see you. She has her first solo art show at her college gallery next Saturday night. It's a big deal for her. She specifically asked me to tell you that you're invited. He gave the date, the time, the address of the gallery, his voice careful, neutral, but not unkind. Then the message ended with a soft click. The room spun. I had to reach out and steady myself against the wall. This wasn't the dramatic, cinematic forgiveness I had sometimes, in my wildest hopes, imagined, a tearful reunion at the airport, a crushing hug, words of absolution spoken through sobs. This was something else. Something more real, more fragile, and infinitely more terrifying. It was an invitation. A simple, open-ended invitation to step back into her world, on her terms. It was a single word written on a new, blank page of our story. Come. The night of the art show, I stood outside the small, modern campus gallery, my knees trembling. I felt nauseous. Through the large glass windows, I could see a crowd of people moving about, their faces animated, their voices a pleasant murmur. The walls were a stark white, a perfect backdrop for the explosions of color that were Lily's work. I saw Ben first. He was standing near the entrance, talking to an older couple I didn't recognize. He looked good. He had a new jacket, and he seemed lighter. He turned, and his gaze found me standing there in the shadows. For a long, suspended moment, we just looked at each other across the distance of the sidewalk and the year of separation. Then, he gave me a small, slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't the wide, open smile of our early years, but it wasn't the grief-stricken stare of our ending, either. It was an acknowledgement. A recognition. A beginning. And then I saw her. Lily. My daughter. She was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a small group of admirers. She was taller, more poised, her hair was cut in a sophisticated new style. She was wearing a black dress, and she looked so grown up, so confident, so fully herself. She was gesturing towards one of her paintings, explaining something, and she was radiant. She was an artist. She was whole, and she had become this person without me. The thought was a piercing blend of pain and a profound, unexpected pride. She turned, almost as if she had sensed me, and her gaze found mine across the crowded room. The noise of the gallery seemed to fade into a distant, oceanic roar. Everyone else became blurred, out-of-focus background characters. It was just her and me, connected by a taut, invisible thread of history and hope. She excused herself from her friends and began to walk toward me. Each step she took felt like an hour, a lifetime. She stopped a few feet away, and we simply looked at each other, taking each other in. "You came," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, older. "I read your invitation," I managed to reply, my own voice a tremulous whisper. It was the most beautiful story I've ever been offered. A small, tentative, but genuine smile touched the corners of her lips. It was like the sun breaking through clouds after a long winter. She didn't say anything else. She just gestured for me to follow her. She led me through the crowd, which parted for her like she was a queen, to a quieter corner of the gallery where a single, large painting hung, spotlighted like a holy relic. It was a new one. I hadn't seen it in her letters. It was a classroom. But it wasn't a literal representation of my classroom. It was something more symbolic, more ideal. In the painting, a woman who was unmistakably me sat on a colorful, patterned rug, surrounded by a circle of children. But I wasn't holding a book. I was holding a single, glowing paintbrush. And the children around me weren't just reading, they were building intricate structures with blocks, they were composing music on tiny keyboards, they were dancing, they were drawing. And from their hands, their mouths, their hearts, light was streaming forth, not just from books, but from their very beings. These streams of light, gold, cerulean, crimson, emerald, were weaving together in the air above them, forming a magnificent, complex, living tapestry of sound and color and story. And integrated seamlessly into that tapestry, woven into its very fabric, were words. Words of hope, and kindness, and courage. Words like empathy and create and listen and grow. The title, painted in gold leaf at the bottom, was the new alphabet. I looked from the painting to my daughter, tears streaming freely and unashamedly down my face now. I had no control over them. "Lily," I choked out, I don't have the words." She reached out then. She took my hand. Her grip was firm, warm, real. It was the first time we had touched in over a year. "You don't need them, Mom," she said softly, her own eyes glistening. "You just have to be here." In that touch, in those simple, profound words, I felt it. It wasn't a grand, sweeping absolution that erased the past. It was a quiet, steady, resilient peace. It was an understanding that the story wasn't over. There were still more chapters to be written, difficult conversations to be had, amends to be carefully made. The scars would always be there. But the narrative had shifted. The protagonist was no longer just stumbling in the dark, she was beginning to find her way, guided by the light of the very hearts she had once neglected. I had spent my entire career believing I was the teacher, the one who held the keys to the kingdom of language. I thought I was teaching them to read, to decode the symbols that unlocked the wisdom of the world. But my students, in their beautiful, unadulterated wisdom, were teaching me the one lesson that no book could ever truly impart. They were teaching me how to forgive. How to forgive the world for its cruelties, how to forgive others for their shortcomings, and most importantly, how to forgive myself for my own profound, human failures. They taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about gathering up all the broken, painful, beautiful pieces of it, and with a trembling hand, and a heart finally cracked open to the light, learning how to weave them into a new, more compassionate, more whole beginning.